You are deep in the West African rainforest, and you hear it before you can place it. A rhythm, crack, a pause, crack, crack. It is coming from up ahead, steady as a heartbeat, and for a moment you file it under woodpecker, falling branch, some forest thing doing forest things. Then you push through the wet leaves and you see the source. A chimpanzee sitting on her haunches, hoisting a heavy stone above her head and slamming it down on a nut resting on a flat rock. She does it again. Her fingers find the crack. She pries the shell open, and she eats the meat inside with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has done this 10,000 times. Because she has, and so did her mother and her mother's mother, back past living memory, back past anything you call remembering. You watch her do it once more, and a stupid question surfaces in your head. The kind you never say out loud at a zoo. When did that stone stop being a rock? Think about that name for a second. Stone Age. It is 1/3 of the oldest system humans use to divide their own past. The 3-age system. Stone, bronze, iron, a way of sorting the garbage of ancient campsites by material. When you were a kid, you probably learned those 3 names in school and never questioned them. But notice what the label actually says about us. We named the longest era of human history after the tools we made, not after the art we painted or the gods we invented. The stone is the thing we chose to define ourselves with. So here is the question nobody asks while watching that scene in the forest. When did the stone in her hand stop being a rock and become a tool? And if the honest answer is a very long time ago, then whose Stone Age was it? Exactly. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a hammer the same way again. That is a promise. The evidence is hiding in places you would never think to check. A termite mound in Tanzania, a nut-cracking site in the Ivory Coast with a buried stone layer 4,000 years old. A dry riverbed in Kenya with tools older than the entire human genus. And a troop of monkeys in Brazil who flake stones exactly like our ancestors did, with zero interest in becoming us. This is not a story about clever animals. It is a story about who actually invented the toolbox. And it is not who you think. First, we need to talk about the word tool because the whole argument hangs on it. Every child grows up hearing some version of the same story. Humans are special because we make tools. That is the line that separates us from everything else on the planet. Museums built entire halls around it. Anthropologists wrote whole books with the title Man the Toolmaker, as if the species and the hammer came into existence in the same sentence. It feels clean. It feels true. It feels like the one thing you can point to and say, this is us. The problem is that the story has a hole in it, and the hole was dug by an animal that never set foot in a single one of our museums. It was 1960, and a young researcher named Jane Goodall walked into Gombe, a forest reserve on the shore of Lake Tanganyika in Tanzania. She wasn't even supposed to find anything. She was a former secretary from England with no university degree, sent into the bush on the hunch of an anthropologist named Louis Leakey, who wanted someone to watch chimpanzees with no preconceptions and no training to ruin the looking. Within months, she watched a chimpanzee strip a twig, poke it into a termite mound, and pull it out covered in bugs, then eat them off the stick like a popsicle. She called it fishing. Tool use. The scientific establishment reacted the way you expect from an establishment. They said she was wrong, or that she imagined it, or that it didn't T-count because the twig wasn't T-modified enough. What did that make us, if a chimp could do it too? Leakey's response became legend. He told the world that scientists now had 3 options. Redefine tool, redefine human, or accept that chimpanzees are human. He was being deliberately outrageous, but the point landed. The wall had a crack in it, and the crack kept growing because Goodall only opened the door. The truly uncomfortable part came from the other side of Africa, where chimpanzees were doing something much harder than fishing for termites. It took years for her observation to sink in. Goodall documented the behavior formally, and her team published the evidence in Nature in 1964, a detailed account of tool use and even aimed throwing among the wild chimpanzees of Gom. The journal gave it space. The world gave it an argument. Every few years, some researcher would try to shrink the definition of tool so that a chimpanzee's twig didn't T-fit, and every time the chimpanzees kept right on using the twig, the definition kept losing. The Thai forest in Côte d'Ivoire. There, chimpanzees don't just poke sticks into holes. They crack nuts. Really hard nuts. The kind you would struggle to open with a rock yourself. They set each nut on a flat stone anvil. They pick up a hammer stone, sometimes weighing several kilograms, and they choose it the way you choose a good hammer at a hardware store, testing the weight, turning it over in their hands. Then they swing it down, over and over, adjusting the angle until the shell splits. Some of the nuts, the cooler and the panda, are so hard that a human needs a real tool or a lot of anger to open one. The chimpanzees just sit there, patient as stone, and they do it. The sound carries half a kilometer through the trees, a slow stone heartbeat telling anyone who listens that a community is at work. It is skilled, careful, deliberate work, and it is not a one-time trick. It is a tradition, passed from mother to child for generations. We know that because of the archaeology, and the archaeology is where this story stops being cute. Back in the early 2000s, an archaeologist named Giulio Makeda and his team did something nobody had done before. They treated a chimpanzee nut-cracking site like a human excavation. They marked out a grid at the base of a nut tree in Thai, the way you would at a hominin site, and they dug down through the soil in careful levels, and buried in the earth, they found hammer stones, real ones, with impact scars on them, the same damage you see on a hammer that had been swung 10,000 times. They found anvils with the same wear, flat stones with the telltale pitting of 1,000 impacts. Then they tested the stones for residues, and the hammers came back positive for starch, nut starch. Those exact stones had cracked nuts in that exact spot, and the food was still on them thousands of years later, like the world's slowest evidence bag. Then came the date, and this is the number you should write down. The layer was about 4,300 years old. 4,000 years of chimpanzees at one tree, cracking nuts with stones, leaving the evidence buried in the ground like a tiny Stone Age settlement that no human ever built. The Great Wall of China is younger than that layer. The entire written history of ancient Egypt is barely longer than that layer. And when Mercader compared those hammer stones to the earliest known human stone tools, the Oldowan industry, the one archaeologists date to around 2.5 million years ago, he found that the two overlap so completely you can separate them by shape. Same raw materials, same breakage patterns, same wear. Drop a Thai hammer into a museum case labeled early human tools, and nobody would notice. So how does an animal that never built a museum produce the exact same object we fill them with? You think a buried workshop would settle the argument. It didn't. When Makeda first announced that chimpanzee sites could be excavated like human ones, plenty of archaeologists pushed back. Those stones are just rocks, they said, dropped by accident, not placed with intent. The rebuttal took years. The follow-up study recovered the starch residues, dated the sediment layers, and documented hammers and anvils sitting in place. The site looked like a workshop, a chimpanzee workshop, but a workshop with the same signature a human archaeologist would recognize anywhere. To do this work at all, Makeda had to invent a new field. He called it primate archaeology, the study of material culture made by non-human primates, and it now has its own methods, its own debates, and its own graduate students. Think about that for a second. There are people whose entire job is to excavate the workshops of chimpanzees. A few decades ago, that sentence would have sounded like a joke. Today, It is a discipline with a peer-reviewed literature and a proper name. Every year, its papers appear in journals, its methods spread to new sites, and somewhere a new student learns to dig a square pit under a nut tree and read the soil, like a book. And the older one is not some obscure footnote, it is the famous one. The name comes from Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, the same gorge where Louis and Mary Leakey spent decades digging up the story of early humans. The same family, by the way, that sent Goodall into the field in the first place. Mary Leakey's excavations there in the 1960s produced the classic Oldowan toolkit, choppers, and sharp flakes that every archaeology textbook still uses as the cover image for the dawn of human technology. Oldowan tools are the first recognized stone tool industry. Simple cores with flakes knocked off them, cutting edges, the very beginning of the story we tell about ourselves. And a chimpanzee hammer from the Thai forest sits in the same shape class. The textbooks don't mention that part. When did the line between us and the animals get so blurry that a rock can tell the difference? Now, a reasonable person might stop and say, fine, chimpanzees use tools. We knew that. But the timeline is the trap, because the tools show up before we do. In 2015, a team led by Sonia Harmond and Jason Lewis at Stony Brook University went public with a discovery from a site called Lomekwi 3 in Kenya. The story goes that the team took a wrong turn in the desert and stumbled onto it by accident, which is how the best archaeology tends to happen. They had uncovered stone tools scattered on a slope, some of them heavy, weighing several kilograms, along with cores, flakes, and anvils with battered surfaces. Nothing fancy, but the date, 3.3 million years old, which pushed the known origins of stone tools back by roughly 700,000 years. The genus Homo doesn't show up in the fossil record until around 2.8 million years ago. Something was making tools 500,000 years before there was anything you'd call a human. The maker was probably an Australopithecine, an ancestor, or a cousin, but no fossil was found with the tools. So the species is not certain. What is certain is this. The first tools were not made by humans. The first tools were made by something before us, and the habit was already ancient when we inherited it. And if 3.3 million years is uncomfortable enough, we have to talk about the monkeys. Not the great apes, the monkeys. It was 2016, and a team led by Thomas Prophet, then at University College London, published something that made archaeologists wince. In the dry hills of Serra da Capivara, in Brazil, wild capuchin monkeys pound rocks together, sometimes to break nuts, sometimes for no reason anyone can figure out. Why does a monkey do that? Nobody knows. Prophet's team collected the sharp flakes left behind and ran them through the same three-dimensional geometric analysis used on human stone tools. The capuchin flakes matched Oldowan flakes, statistically indistinguishable. A monkey produces the same sharp-edged waist as a hominin from 2.5 million years ago, with no intention of becoming anything. And here is the twist. The same region holds some of the oldest cave art in the Americas, paintings left by early people thousands of years ago. So one stretch of Brazilian desert contains humans making art and monkeys making stone flakes, and the flakes are the ones that look ancient. That is not cute. That is a philosophical headache, because it means stone tools are not a human achievement. They a convergent trick that keeps evolving in the primate family, like running upright or having flexible hands. The sharp edge was never a signature. It is an accident of physics that any hand can discover, given a rock and a little patience. Give a forest, a nut and a stone, and some primate will eventually put them together. Planet of the Apes got the scary part wrong and the tool part right. The apes were never waiting for us to teach them anything. They were already using the equipment when we showed up. A Swiss researcher named Christoph Bosch founded the Thai Chimpanzee Project in 1979, and for the next 40 years he and his colleagues documented the chimpanzees of that forest in what they called chimpanzee ethnography, field notes. Family histories, years of follow-up, treating ape behavior the way an anthropologist treats a human culture, with births, deaths, migrations, and grudges, all logged in the same ledger. And what they recorded was not instinct, it was culture. Different groups of chimpanzees do things differently, and they keep doing them differently, even when they live a few kilometers apart. The cleanest example came from a 2012 study led by Lydia Lunks and her colleagues. In Thai, two neighboring chimpanzee communities use different hammer styles. One cracks nuts with stone hammers. The other, in the same forest on the same food, uses wooden clubs. Both work. Both styles have held for years, possibly generations. The communities share a border. Individuals move between them now and then, and they still don't copy each other. Style, that is not genetics. That is a cultural boundary. Humans draw borders over language and food and hammer styles too, by the way. We just call it identity. It takes real time to learn, which is another mark of culture. At Bossou in Guinea, a team led by Tetsuro Matsuzawa of Kyoto University watched young chimpanzees spend 3 to 7 years practicing nut cracking before they got good at it. Mothers demonstrate. Infants watch. The first attempts are clumsy, shells everywhere, the hammer landing on fingers. Tools get carried from one tree to the next, sometimes over long distances, which means the apes are planning ahead. A chimpanzee doesn't just use a hammer. She chooses one, brings it along, and remembers where the good anvils are. That is not a reflex. That is a skill with a syllabus. And here is a small detour, because I want you to feel how deep this runs. Researchers studying capuchins in the same region once noticed the monkeys peeing on their hands and rubbing them together. A very serious scientist wrote a paper suggesting it might be social bonding. Nobody knows why they do it. As far as anyone can tell, it is completely useless. And the monkeys have been doing it anyway, generation after generation. Honestly, respect. Somewhere in Brazil, a capuchin is shaking hands with itself for reasons science will never explain. And it does not care. Now, watch what humans do with this information, because it is the strangest part of the whole story. Every time the evidence moves. First, tools were human. Then, Goodall showed chimpanzees use tools, so the definition became manufactured tools. Then, we learned chimpanzees manufacture them, so it became tools made to a standard design. Then, we learned chimpanzees pass the design down through families, so it became tools that imply language. Each time, we raise the bar just high enough that the chimpanzees can reach it. We keep relocating the finish line and calling it a race. If you ever argued with a relative about what counts as a real job, you already know the pattern. And the tradition is old in a way we don't. Usually measure. 4,000 years is 4,000 mother-daughter lessons without a single broken link. Somewhere in that forest, a mother taught her daughter, who taught hers, all the way back to a time when humans were still building the first cities in Mesopotamia. When you watch a chimpanzee crack a nut today, you are watching the tail end of a chain of lessons 4 millennia long. The chain is older than writing, older than the wheel, older than every record we keep. You can count the documented human traditions that old on your fingers, and most of them come with writing attached. We just never kept the record for them. There is one difference worth naming, though, and it is not the one we usually brag about. Chimpanzees have kept the same hammer for 4,000 years. Same shape, same technique, same result. No version 2. No ergonomic upgrade. Humans take a design and stack improvements on it until the original is unrecognizable. The hammer became a machine. The machine became a factory, and the factory learned to build factories. That is cumulative culture, and it is genuinely rare in nature. So the question is whether they have tools. The question is why they never needed to improve the tool. Maybe because the nut hasn't gotten any harder. Maybe because the hammer was already good enough. And a tradition that works for 4,000 years doesn't need a product update. Now here is the uncomfortable part nobody says out loud. Humans have a long history of losing the crown. Copernicus moved us off the center of the universe. Darwin moved us off the throne of creation. And now archaeology is quietly moving us off the title of toolmaker. Every time we find a new boundary between us and the animals, the boundary turns out to be a dotted line. Maybe the real difference was never the object in the hand. Maybe it is what we do with the object over time. The slow stacking of improvements that turned one chipped stone into a phone that can call the other side of the world. Step back and look at the whole picture. Tool use is not a boundary around humanity. It is a river that runs through the whole primate family, and we are not its source. We re the branch that happened to take the habit further, stacking stones into machines, tying them to shafts, wiring them into circuits. But the gesture itself, the arm swinging a weighted stone down on something hard, that gesture was old before our genus existed. We didn't invent the toolbox. We inherited it, added rooms, and put a sign on the door that said ours. Next time you pick up a hammer, look at it. The wooden handle is the only part that is new. The weight, the swing, the aim, the tiny satisfaction when something cracks open, you share all of that with a chimpanzee under a nut tree 4,000 years ago, and with an Australopithecine 3 million years before her. The same stone, the same motion, the same stubborn idea that the world will crack if you hit it right. So what actually separates us? Then, the Stone Age was never ours alone, and the next time someone tells you humans are the tool-making animal, ask them who taught the first toolmaker. Then go crack a nut the old way. It is still on the menu.